All right, everybody, and welcome to the PWZ podcast. Today I have here with me the Arab legend, Farat. How are you today, sir?
Man, I'm doing absolutely great. I appreciate you having me on the show. I haven't done one of these in a while, but I always look forward to it because I get to we get to give the fans kind of like a behind the scenes sneak peek of our personal lives.
Yeah, I'm very excited because, there's links to my youth and some of the questions I'm going to have here for you and me growing up as a fan and such. So, but before we get into any of that stuff, I want to say, in your youth and such, when did you discover professional wrestling and what made you want to get into the business of professional wrestling?
Around 1973 is kind of when I remember watching wrestling for the first time. My grandfather used to come to the house, my father's father. He was a huge wrestling fan. From around 73 to about, I don't know, 78 or so, I remember he would always come to visit. And when he would come to visit, although he didn't live there, we had to abandon the living room because he would watch wrestling. And it got to the point to where he would make it a tradition. I mean, we would watch wrestling from the Philadelphia Spectrum. It would come out on of course, I don't remember the channel right now, but that was a long time ago, 78, I guess. Prism. It was Prism. I remember it was Prism
Right.
TV. And anyway, so we would always watch it. And I was so intrigued and amazed because, it was good guy versus bad guy, old school storytelling. But what I was attracted to the most were the characters. I remember Baron von Raschke and Baron Mikhail Cicluna and George the Animal Steel, and I seemed to always be attracted to those monster like animalistic like characters, the crazy types. They would hide the foreign objects and stuff like that. But yeah, that's kind of when I remember beginning to like professional wrestling when I lived in New York City and New Jersey, that area. And my grandfather would watch it.
So what is that what influenced you basically to get into it that when you grew up a little bit?
Well, yes and no. I always, wondered what it would be like to be in the ring, but back then it wasn't like now where you have schools, professional wrestling schools all over the place, So I would, of course, put mattresses up in the backyard with my friends and we would we would wear these crazy outfits and I remember as a young child wearing a towel on my head, an actual towel, and being some kind of Sheik, because man, he was my favorite. The original Sheik, Eddie Farhat, was my absolute favorite. And I'll get to that story because there's a connection to what I do now and the Sheik. Anyway, so fast forward years later, I was about 13 years old, and my dad, so we find these four posts in somebody's yard, and even at 13, I had the knowledge enough to know that it was four posts for a ring. I didn't know if it was a boxing ring, a wrestling ring. Anyway, so the guy says, "Well, get them out of my yard if you want them." So I got them, and I would collect cans. I would wash cars. I would, do the neighbors' yards to gather enough money because we were poor, we weren't rich, and my dad of course helped me build my first little ring. I was 13, 14 years old, and I remember it was a 12-footer. We made it a 12-footer, and I do little shows in my yard for the neighborhood kids. We didn't know what we were doing, but again, I even at that age, man, I could sort of kind of put a show together and put a match together. So keep in mind, the whole time my mother knew about this affinity that I had for professional wrestling. She never said anything. My mother and father divorced. He still didn't say anything. When I was about 16 years old, my mother comes up to me and we're talking about something related to wrestling, I'm sure. And she said, "Yeah, my cousin, yeah, he does that, and blah, 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 blah." And of course, she caught my attention. I said, your cousin related to her?" And she said, yeah, Robert does that. I said, "Robert Cortez, Uncle Robert Cortez?" Yeah, of course. I knew him as Robert, Bobby. We didn't know him.
Right.
Turns out he was Robert Cortez's Bobby Bold Eagle from New York City. That's
Right.
he's related to me. We're related. So Bobby Cortez at that point had a school, and it used to be at the St. Mary's Park in I forget the name, 183rd and something in the Bronx, but he moved his school to the same building as Johnny Rodz' school on Front Street. It was Gleason's gym, except they had it on different days. So long story short, my uncle started training me, kind of, taught me the ropes and whatever. Keep in mind, I was 16 years old. And I was such a rabid fan of professional wrestling that even though they hated, I'm not going to say they hated each other, because that's probably a strong word, but they weren't friends. And he didn't like the fact that I was thinking about approaching Johnny Rodz, because who didn't know Johnny Rodz? Back he was the unpredictable one. So I approached Johnny Rodz and I started training 5 days a week. Literally, I would go Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays for Johnny, and then Tuesdays and Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays, something like that. So I started training with both of them, and I got real chummy with Johnny Rodz, and he put me on some of his first shows with Chief Thunder Mountain and Mondo Clean, who later on went to become Damian Demento. And I started with all these guys, Yeah. Anyway, so after I found out that was my relative, that's kind of how I got involved in professional wrestling when I was 16, 17 years old. And I had my first match against Nikolai Volkov for I forget the name of the promoters. Oh, Manny Siaka. It was at the Ridgewood Arena in Ridgewood, Queens. I wasn't even 18 yet. I was 17 and a half years old. And that's when I first broke into professional wrestling. I'm 53, so been in it quite a while.
I'm trying to think of what time period that was with Nikolai Volkov, because was he still with WWF, or was he leased out at the time?
Yeah, he was leased out. He actually did shows with different promoters at the time, especially in the Northeast. There were several guys I remember were doing shows at that time that were with WW. Well, then it was WWF.
Right.
I remember seeing Iron Mike Sharp on some shows. Greg Valentine. I want to say even Snuka was already doing shows for different promotions. Especially, I don't know if they went outside of the Northeast Coast, but I know in the Northeast Coast, several promotions were using them.
I remember, excuse me, Tommy Jeanette's Northeast Championship Wrestling would get all of those guys that you just mentioned. And I think I remember seeing Valentine and Acts of Demolition headline a show at a fair here while they were both still employed with the WWF. Yeah,
and Tito Santana.
Yep.
And I think I did 1 or 2 shows with Marty back in the day. Of course, back then you kind of worked with everybody. Dino Santa from Pennsylvania. I think he had WWWA, and then you had Tito Torres was running back then in New Jersey. Carluzzo, I want to say. Dennis Carluzzo.
Yeah, famous. He was involved with the NWA, Dennis Carluzzo, and then I wouldn't say he was involved in the ECW, but when ECW was part of the NWA, they would kind of promote shows together in a way, and that only lasted probably about a year or so.
Is that when they were Northeast Championship Wrestling? I mean, not Northeast, I'm sorry, Eastern Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, I think that that title tournament, that's when Corluzzo would work with ECW, and then Shane Douglas threw down the belt and stuff, if you remember that angle.
Yeah, oh yeah, sure do.
Yeah. So I think that's when ECW just decided to change the name to Extreme from Eastern.
That's crazy. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. I remember their inaugural champion. I think their inaugural champion was Snuka, wasn't it?
Correct. Yep. I just watched an interview with Todd Gordon, an older interview with Todd Gordon recently. So so that was true. The the Snuka was the world champion at first. Yeah.
I remember I did one show for those guys, and Salvatore Bellomo was on the show. Yep. He was working for them at the Wildman Bellomo.
Yes, he was at that time period. They had a lot of their earliest days were completely different. If you remember, we're going to talk about the Savoldis at some point today, but Tony Rumble was in there, and then there was a lot of guys that were kind of coming from Rumble, or excuse me, the Savoldis and over, it was kind of like the whole East Coast feel.
Yeah.
That whole Northeast feel until, of course, the Savoldis started to wind down. So yeah, there was a lot of those old timer Northeastern guys that were making their way over there.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that very, very well. When we came in with the Savoldis, there was kind of a period where you started getting the new blood started coming in. That's when Dreamer and Taz and a lot of those guys came in. But yeah, I remember that transition, if you will.
I think Taz for them might have been the longest running original, like for them, and Northeastern guy original. That guy was all over the place in the Northeast.
Oh yeah. He was the when he first started, it was Tasmaniac.
Yep. Yeah, and he was I think he was under a hood for a little bit with Tony Rumble for the Savoldis. I think going back to before it was IWCCW, when it was ICW, like he was in there. So, all right, so hang on, I got some other questions here. You worked with Scott Hall in Puerto Rico for WWC. Let me know about that one. That's kind of a pretty. What year was that, and where? How was that?
Did you say Scott Hall?
Scott Hall, yes.
Yeah. I went in 2007. Of course, I've been going to Puerto Rico since '87.
Okay.
87 was the first time I ever went to wrestled in Puerto Rico. But in 2007, I went to Puerto Rico. I took one of my students because I had a wrestling school at that time, Al Farat Professional Wrestling School in Ardmore, Oklahoma. And I had about, 10 students, and one of them wanted to go. I was going to Puerto Rico regularly, and in 2007 I went and took him with me. And Mr. 450, he actually got to wrestle Mr. 450. He goes by Mecha Wolf now. And,
he's in the NWA today.
Yeah, correct. He's one half of the tag team champions, I believe.
Yep, La Rebellion.
Yep, that's it. So he had a little, I think he had a few matches with him. My student did. But anyway, so at that time, yeah, Scott Hall was, of course, I had wrestled Scott Hall in 1989 when he was Cowboy Scott Hall. This is a long time ago. I wrestled him when he was Cowboy Scott Hall. But fast forward, yeah, he was there, and I'll never forget. Here I had been in the business for a while in 2007. I walk in there. I'm sitting there in the locker room, and Scott Hall walks in. Of course, I had worked him before, so we talked a little bit, sat down. Who sits right next to me? One of my absolute idols. I mean, I grew up idolizing this guy, was the great Muda. Muda comes, he was on that show with Scott Hall, me, and there was another Japanese guy, but I can't think of his name. Anyway, I can't think of his name, but anyway, yeah, Scott Hall was on that show, and he did pretty well, as a matter of fact. He was already kind of starting to have troubles, but yeah, he was sober the whole time he was there, did a wonderful job, put the baby face over. I think at the time it was Carlito before they hit it big. Him and his brother Eddie were just about to, make it big here in the mainland. But that was a very interesting show, man. I'll never forget it. Of course, I was there for a few months, but I always loved working in Puerto Rico because even to this day, it has that old school feel. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think it's the only territory left that has that type of feel.
Every now and again, I still throw on their television. You can find it on YouTube, like the modern episodes. And it's still, like you said, it's kind of the old school territory that's still very old school.
Yeah, so, very much so.
Do you mind telling me about meeting Scott Hall in 1989? And where was that?
89, I met him in Cataño, Puerto Rico. We did WWC. Back then, they were called Capital Sports Promotions. Mm-hmm. And Carlos Colon and Victor Jovica, the owners, they used to have television tapings every Wednesday in a small rooster, a cockfighting coliseum. Probably seats, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people. And he was there. He was brought in as Cowboy Scott Hall, or El Gigante Vaquero, the giant cowboy. And I remember, I kid you not, I tell people this story, and that match is actually somewhere on YouTube. I remember him coming up to me saying, "Hey kid, I'm going to try this new move." This is before he went into WWF the first time.
He was just coming from the AWA, I think, in
late
80s, and then he ended up in NWA / and then into WCW shortly after shaving his mustache. So
Yep. Well, he still had the mustache, the bushy hair,
yeah,
and he grabs me and he puts me in that hold where he lifts you over his shoulder. What was it called? The
Razor's Edge.
Razor's Edge.
Yeah,
I was one of the first ones to take that freaking bump, dude. It was you know, it's scary because those rings back then in Puerto Rico were stiff. They didn't have any bounce, you know.
yeah.
They were like wrestling like bumping in a boxing ring. But yeah, man, I remember he didn't say very much to me, but I don't ever remember him being rude or kind of a prick. You know, some of these guys, you meet them, they have this air about them. And keep in mind, 1989, I was still relatively new, so I was kind of a jobber, a journeyman, and I was doing jobs. Just to give you an idea, I'd go in there on a Wednesday. We'd show up about 4:00 and wrap up about 10 or 11, and we had to do 4 television programs out of that one night because we would only run there once a month.
Right.
So you had to have 4 shows in the can, and so I'd wrestle, you know, 2, 3. I don't think I wrestled more than 3 times, but 2, 3 times a night, easy.
Yeah, I remember those, like, you know, going to tapings and back in the day, especially around here. You know, WWF would do the same thing.
Yeah.
The age before the internet and the age before the spoilers would be able to be found just an hour or 2 later. You know.
Yeah, they were the dirt sheets that would would sometimes report about stuff. But anyway, so I'd wrestle. Like one night, I remember I wrestled. I'll never forget this. Now, of course, I don't remember the order because it was a long time ago. But in one night, I wrestled Bruiser Brody, Stan Hansen, and Abdullah the Butcher on the same night. 3 different matches. And man, I don't know how I made it out of there because Stan Hansen, I mean, Abdullah not so much, but Hansen, particularly Hansen, was very stiff.
Yeah.
And people there's this urban legend that when he takes his glasses off, he can't see. I don't know how true that is. I think I think it's been gimmicked up a little bit. I don't think he's that freaking blind. But anyway, the point is he was real stiff. And I think he took liberties with some of the guys using the excuse that he was blind because he about took my neck off. I didn't think I was going to walk, you know. But anyway, back to Scott Hall. Yeah, he was the other way around. Scott Hall never took liberties. No, I've heard stories about Scott Hall sometimes taking liberties, but with me, he never did. He was a true gentleman.
Let me asking you, you mentioned Bruiser Brody working in Puerto Rico at the same time as you. Do you have any interesting stories about him while you were down there?
I'm sure you did a little bit of research on me. And if you have, then you probably have heard that I was there the night he got murdered.
Oh, really?
So, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. I was already, now keep in mind, I was just a kid. I was putting up the rings, taking down the rings, going from building to building, transporting wrestlers to and from the airport. And man, I've got stories. I literally could write a book, and I've been offered many times to write a book. I've got stories that you would not believe. Like, let me give you a quick story before I go into before I segue into the Bruiser Brody thing. I was told one time by the booker, who is the man who murdered Bruiser Brody,
Jose Gonzalez.
Jose Huertas Gonzalez, who, by the way, I've never had an issue with him. There's different stories as to what, you know, what happened. You know, man, you know, it's a touchy subject because some of us believe that Brody sometimes was a little bit difficult to deal with, and sometimes he took liberties with promoters. And if he didn't want to do a job or he simply wouldn't do it. I've heard stories he was racist, that he didn't like black people. I don't know. I never heard him say it, but who's to say what really is true and not true? I can tell you this from what I heard, he used to bully the hell out of Jose, and Jose just got fed up one day. That's just, you know, human nature. People get pissed off. They get upset, and then things escalate. Now, Jose, who was the booker at the time, said, "I need you to go to the airport and pick up the Iron Sheik and Rocky Johnson. That's The Rock's dad." And I'll never forget. I remember telling them, "Look, this is my mom's car." When I picked up, I was starstruck. I kid you not. The Iron Sheik he had shorts and a muscle shirt, and he had his wrestling boots on with his curly horn boots. I tell them I put their stuff keep in mind, I'm 17, 18 years old. Put their stuff in the trunk, get them in the car. I see Rocky Johnson has cigars in his in his pocket, and he has one in his hand ready to light up. I tell those guys, don't smoke in my car. This is my mom's car. Rocky, first thing he did is light up a cigar, which, by the way, thanks to him, now I'm a cigar smoker. I love cigars. I have a walk-in humidor and everything. Anyway, he lights his cigar. A few minutes later, he turns around and tells Sheiky baby, don't you light up. Because he was known for smoking weed, and
Yeah.
I've heard other stuff. I look back there, and he's filling up a pipe. He's smoking weed in my mom's car. Needless to say, I got in trouble. Anyway, I digress. So back to the Bruiser Brody thing. So Bruiser Brody comes up to me and he goes, all right, kid, it's not going to last long, yada, yada, yada. Do the job, watch the boot. Well, me being brand new, I had no idea what he means by watch the boot. I literally thought he meant when he brings his boot up, look at it and walk into it. About took my head off. But he was the type of guy that no nonsense, all about business, all about money. If he didn't want to put you over, he wasn't going to put you over. Period. He didn't care who the promoter was. So there I was. I remember that night, Jules Strongbow, one of my very dearest friends, Jules Strongbow, I still talk to him every month. He was there. The Young Bloods were there, Tony Atlas. Of course, keep in mind, I'm still in training. I'm still a young kid putting up rings, trying to pay my dues, if you will.
Right.
And I hear all this commotion, and I'll be damned if he didn't walk out. Jose didn't walk out with his hand underneath the towel. And do you know the show still went on? Everything you hear about it is true. All the other particulars, like what Tony Atlas said or did, I try not to get into that because I didn't physically see it. But to know that I was there that night, really, to this day, I'm shocked that I was even there, that I'm able to talk about it. I think it's amazing.
I didn't even know until they covered it on Dark Side of the Ring, the Vice series, and I didn't know that Tony Atlas was actually there until he was interviewed for that, or he, like that. So I didn't actually know if any of his facts were actually true when covered on that show.
Well, and that's why I say it's hard for me to really have an opinion on it, because you and I both know that a lot of these guys tend to stretch the truth a little, and Tony Atlas is known for being a bullshitter. I've known Tony Atlas for my entire, wrestling 30 plus years. I remember Tony Atlas played a prank on me, and to this day, I it really upsets me, but I realized that that's just the way the business was. Back then they would, hazing was a thing.
Yeah.
You can't get away with that in this day and age. But I remember Tony Atlas sat me in a locker room all by himself. It was a little tiny locker room. It was probably 10 by 10, just a little bitty room. And he says, because he knew that I wanted to do the Indian gimmick, the Native American, because I'm Native American and Hispanic. And the Young Bloods were over, and they were friends. And the Young Bloods, I vividly remember the late Chris Youngblood, gone now. He told me, you can't do that gimmick. That's our gimmick. But yet the office had me provide them with Native American music, Native American this, Native, to this day, I don't hold a grudge, but it just really upsets me that they did that. They didn't want me to do the indie gimmick, so they gave me a bullshit gimmick called Pedro Santos. I don't know where that came from, but it's not even my name. My last name really is Santos, but not Pedro. Anyway, the point is that they knew every time I went there every Wednesday, on those Wednesdays for the television taping, they knew that I had this chip on my shoulder because I really wanted to do that Native American gimmick, and they wouldn't let me do it. I had to literally go work for the opposition in Puerto Rico well, I'll get to that in a second. Anyway, so Tony Atlas comes in one day and he goes, hey, I spoke to the Young Bloods. I spoke to Mark, and at that time it was Mark and Chris because Jay had already passed away. And they're going to bring you in as a third Young Blood. Dude, he sits me in this slot, and I'm young. What do I know? I'm 17 and a half, 18 years old. I sit in the locker room. He tells me to cross my legs Indian style, and he starts putting paint on me. I guess he got it from them. He puts paint on me like this, and almost ceremoniously, puts a feather in my head, puts a bandana around me, and tells me to stay sitting down and not to move. Leaves the room, and I'm sitting there like an idiot. I'm thinking, but again, I had enough know-how even at 17 or 18, to know, okay, something's going on here. So I got up and just as I was rubbing the paint off and taking everything off, they all walk in there with at that time they had these little cameras. They were like, they were video cameras, but they weren't the modern stuff you see now.
Okay.
And yeah, they thought it was funny, and that I was, but so they didn't catch me, in fragante, but they caught me wiping it off, and I was so embarrassed. But anyway, so I know that that's just the type of person that Tony was. So Tony's been known to be full of shit. Let's just put it to you that way. But I can't say if his story is true or not because I wasn't there. What I can tell you is that the story going around that Tony Atlas and Mark and Chris Youngblood didn't show up for the trial. From what I understand, the subpoenas were mailed late, so they got it after the trial had ended.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
Now, it could that be true? Yes. But it could also not be true. I'll tell you this: Puerto Rico at the time was a very corrupt country. Mm-hmm. So it's very possible that story was true.
Interesting. I did see Tony about a year and a half ago at an event here, and he was, I guess he was very pleasant, maybe because I was a fan there in attendance, but he was a very pleasant guy that night. So selling his artwork and such.
Oh yeah,
that's his new thing, I guess. At shows, doing selling his artwork.
No. That's not new at all. This man. I remember back then, he would sit in the locker room and draw. He's an incredible artist.
Right.
Maybe the fact that he's selling it and making a profit out of it might be new, but yeah, he's always been an artist. He can draw. He can flat out draw. That's for sure.
Did you work with Tony when for the Savoldis when you went over there?
Yeah. Tony was doing a cross between Tony Atlas, Mr. USA, and Black Superman. Remember when he did the whole Black Superman thing?
Yeah, I remember him in World Class doing that.
Yeah.
I don't know how long he was in there, but he would actually come in like a Superman outfit at one point. Do you remember that?
Yeah, he did it for the Savoldis when they switched to IWCCW,
right?
International World Class Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, they combined, and I actually spoke with Kevin Von Erich. So when he said that he sold the name for him, he came in and worked a one date at which he ended up working 4 matches for. And he said that he never saw a dime when he sold them that name at all. So he was actually surprised that I had so much knowledge about that particular topic, when talking to me, because he said that he thought that he didn't know anybody knew about that dealing, that he never saw a dime or nothing like that. But he never saw anything just for selling them that World Class name. And they ended up using it for a good 5 or 6 years before changing back to ICW and then ultimately going out of business.
Yeah, that whole thing was kind of left a bad taste in his mouth. I literally just spoke to Kevin a few days ago because they're doing some type of movie about his family, and the reason why we spoke is because he remembers that I was actually offered the role of Skandar Akbar for the movie.
That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah, when the initial, so there was this lady, and I can't think of her name, Lisa. It'll come to me, but she actually wrote a movie about the Von Erichs and casted me as Skandar Akbar. Kevin knows about it, and she was trying to get like Liam Hemsworth to play Kerry Von Erich and Matthew McConaughey to play him, Kevin. Anyway, so the lady winds up dead in the trunk of her car in Dallas, Texas, and Kevin calls me to tell me about it. Kevin goes, "You ain't gonna believe this, man. It's all over the news." Sure enough, I researched it, and I don't know what happened, if it was a drug deal gone bad, but yeah, she wrote the script. Now, this may be a completely different script, but the movie never got done because she obviously passed away. And now, fast forward, we spoke because I'm like, well, let him know that I can still play Skandar Akbar, because I was one of Skandar's very last guys that he managed before he passed away. Me and a guy named Spoiler 2000 and some other guys. So, yeah, that whole thing, which is funny because then, ironically, he goes to sell the name to one of my students. the guy that owns World Class Wrestling Revolution, in his name is Jerry Bostic. He's one of my students. I trained him, one of my pupils. So he wound up selling the name to him. Of course, then they parted ways. I don't know. I don't know that. I thought this whole time that WWE had the rights to that name because they bought the library, but I guess they never. I guess they didn't buy the name.
I guess they bought the video library for that, and the Savoldis have an incredible library of stuff that they own as well. So I guess that they still own that name because they have the what they own for the actual world class stuff it's mind boggling because it's like,
really,
how much does WWE actually own? And then the Savoldis own like a short, like, I don't know, just a little bit of it from like the latest, like the last days, which is just, it's very confusing because when did they go out of business? Was it 1990, the Von Erichs, before selling to Jarrett?
You would probably get me to lying. I don't know. I'd say 90, 91, something like that.
Yeah, it might have been, somewhere around there before. And it's so I don't know what exactly, like, I know that they have got the WWE Network's got stuff is I know earliest from the 80s up there up until, I don't know, 88. And then I know the Savoldis have their own streaming network as well. And they're just very slow about putting stuff up. They'll put up like 5 episodes of stuff, and then 2 months later they'll decide to upload more stuff. It's they own a lot of stuff, like, the Tony Capone stuff, like the NAWA stuff, or all sorts of video footage. It's crazy. So.
Yeah, I remember watching everything world class related on the network, WW, when it was WWE Network, and I think they go back to 83 or something like that. But,
something like that, yeah.
But which to me were between 83 to 87, 88. Those were the best years. But I'd like to see some of the older stuff from right before they shut down. The Savoldis have always been like that. I remember when they used to put the TV, the product out for IWCW. Back then, people were really enamored by it. It had the production wasn't very much, but they were, to me, it seemed like they were a little bit ahead of their time because they already were talking about. I remember them talking about pay-per-views before pay-per-view was a thing. That's the one thing about Mario that I can honestly say, he was always up to something.
I know that they took some of their older footage and did like bargain pay-per-views. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
probably
that's it. Mm-hmm.
In the earlier 2000s. I think they would have the guy Brian Webster come back and do the in-between match stuff and introductions of stuff, but it was all classic matches and stuff like that because they owned so much. It was just and sometimes you would turn on their TV, it wouldn't be any actual IWCCW footage at all. They'd be showing South Atlantic Pro, or sometimes they'd be showing some old AWA stuff, anything that they owned to fill in while they were doing TV tapings or stuff, because I think that they halted tapings for a while as well.
Yeah, was this before the On Fire thing or after?
Oh yeah, like years before that, many years before that, probably up to 95, and I think it was probably like 94 they ended up coming back and we're doing like brand new footage for about another year before they finally closed. And then when did On Fire start? Probably earlier 2000s, I believe.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, let's go back to talking about yourself. So tell me about becoming Dancing Wolf and joining the Sioux War Party.
Okay, so it's another one of those stories that when I tell the story, I sometimes I can't even believe it. So around, let's see, this would have been 92.
Okay.
Yeah. So around 89 or 90, back in them days, you still had to send in VHS tapes with 2 or 3 year matches, pictures, and blah, 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 blah. At the time, one of the talent relations people, for lack of a better term, Booker, was James Dillon. I remember that, James Dillon, for WWF. I sent him this information, and in hopes to get into the WWF because we had been doing so good as Dancing Wolf and stuff like that, and few months later, I get a letter. I still have that letter to this day that, thank you for sending this in, but we're not interested. It had the WWF logo and blah, 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 blah. A few months later, Tatanka debuted. And I was so freaking upset because I really, really thought that I could have done a better job. But anyway, so the movie Dances with Wolves comes out. Keep in mind, I had already been doing the Native American gimmick, but I had been Al Boldeagle, younger cousin of Bobby Boldeagle. And before I used several names before the Dancing Wolf thing comes up. So one day we get a call from Johnny, and Johnny goes, well, I got a call from Johnny Rodz. He goes, hey, we had just done a show in Torrington, and they were using a guy named Chief Thunder Mountain. I don't know if you remember him.
Yep.
And Savoldis wants to use you and Thunder Mountain as a tag. So you guys need to be in such and such a place. And I don't remember the actual place we went to. I kind of think it was somewhere upstate New York. Oh yeah, it was Kutcher's. It was a Jewish like a resort or something.
Okay.
So we went to Kutcher's, and I met Thunder Mountain, and we hit it off well. We did the show together. A few weeks later, he gets cut from the company. Something happens, and they don't use him anymore. So he had a student by the name of Adolfo Bermudez. He says, well, I'm going to send my student with you. We'll put a war bonnet on him. And he was, so the name, of course, we didn't have the names yet. So when I told Mario Savoldis about this kid that was coming in, I was still using Al Boldeagle. He sees us together, says, man, I like your look. The young bloods were big in world-class Puerto Rico. So I said, I don't want to do the brother gimmick. He goes, no, it'll just be two individuals. So he not him, but his cousin, Tommy, the one that used to do a referee, Tommy Fornini. Tommy Fornini says, let's call them the Sioux War Party. That's how that whole thing came up. Let's call them the Sioux War. We weren't even Sioux, but back then you can get away with that. Now you can't. Now that, right. They call it, what do they call it? Misappropriation or whatever you call it. So the movie had just come out, Dances with Wolves. It was relatively new, so I became Dancing Wolf, and they couldn't come up with a name for my partner. So out of the blue, Tommy again goes, just call him White Cloud, like the toilet paper. Swear to God, true story, true fucking story. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I cuss, by the way?
You can absolutely. We're not censored here. Yeah.
So yeah, he told like the toilet paper. Oh, I'll never forget that. He hated that name all the way up till he got to ECW. Matter of fact, we were still in IWCCW when they sent us to Puerto Rico the first time for the competition, AWF. That's when I jumped ship, and now we became the young bloods counterpart. Anyway, so. While we were the IWCCW champions, we're in Puerto Rico. My partner tells the promoter, it's White Wolf, not White Cloud. It was White Cloud, but he didn't want to use it. So we became Dancing Wolf and White Wolf. But my name comes from the movie Dances with Wolves. That's where that came from. Well, later on, here's the weird part. And if you go to Wikipedia and you Wikipedia him, everybody thinks he's me because he made it seem like he was me, Adolfo. When he went to ECW as one of the Dudley boys, he was a Native American Dudley because, they had a black one, a white one, a fat one, a little one, and whatever. He became Dances with Dudley, like Dances with Wolves,
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's where that name came from. And then they put the titles on us on our first night there. They tell these two guys, okay, you guys are dropping to the Indians. We had those things for about a year and a half. I kid you not. Long time.
I think one of the other guys that worked IWCCW was became a Dudley as well. He worked for the Savoldis as Alexander the Great, maybe, if you do remember him. I'm trying to think of his other name. He ended up changing it, but I can't think of it. I'm sorry.
I can't think of it either. There were so many Dudleys. That's what people don't understand. There was a ton of them. I can't even think of all the other Dudleys. But yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, he is just a big dude. So I'm going to ask you about some of the guys that worked in for the Savoldis at that time. What do you remember about working with L.A. Gore? He was kind of
Oh,
he
L.A.
was very
Gore.
he was a regular and very well known for the Savoldis at that time period.
Yeah, let me tell you, the one thing I remember the most about L.A. Gore is that he was such a sweetheart. Oh my God, he was such a sweetheart. I remember him just being gentle. You know, he was one of those guys that looked like a monster, but was far from it. He used to tag with another guy named oh God, I can't think of his name. Oh, Flex Lavender. You remember
I
him?
remember him. I remember him. Yep.
Yeah, Flex Lavender and L.A. Gore, and then Flex later on went to go tag with one half of the. Oh man, boy, I'm getting forgetful. Give me a second here. The guys that went on to do the rap gimmick. Remember Ted
Oh,
Petty?
Public Enemy. Yep.
Public Enemy, yeah. Well, Public Enemy, but before they were Public Enemy, Ted Petty used to be the Cheetah Kid, I think.
Yep.
And then the other one was
He was Johnny Grunge. He also wrestled as one of the Equalizers, Zap, and then he was
yeah.
Johnny Rotten. So at
Johnny
one point,
Rotten, that's it.
yep.
Johnny Rotten. He
Yep.
was Johnny Rotten, and then him and Flex Lavender wound up having a tag, becoming a tag team. But yeah, back to L.A. Gore, man. L.A. Gore was such a sweetheart, man. Yeah, sometimes I wish I could find some of these guys and see where they're at, you know, just to kind of visit with them and catch up.
Some of them you can find through the IWCC group on Facebook. Some of those guys, like yourself, you know, post in there, you know, quite a bit. So I see.
Yeah,
them.
I saw Ray Odyssey. I saw there was a few people in there that I remember.
Yeah. Tell me about the Maniac, Jimmy Dio.
Oh man, Maniac Jimmy Dio. You know, he went on to promote shows. He actually promoted shows in Pennsylvania. I don't remember the name of the company he had, but I remember the first show he ever ran. He had a guy named the Concrete Cowboy, Paul. He goes by Paul Big Bear, and he's on Facebook. He puts singing videos on Facebook. But Jimmy Dio, yeah, I remember him. I remember him not being. He was never a really good worker.
Right.
But he was a good talker. Not so much a good talker in front of the camera, good talker behind the camera.
He was a staple there. Yeah.
He was just very you know, in a political kind of a way, man. He knew how to talk to promoters and get himself on shows, man. I don't know how he did it, but what a nice guy, man. Jimmy Dio, I remember him being a nice guy, and he gave me a lot of opportunities back then because I did several shows for him.
This guy is very well known. Former ECW superstar, WWE superstar, and current Impact superstar, but the young TD Madison, now known as Tommy Dreamer.
Wow. You know, we came from the same school.
He was trained with Johnny Rodz. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, he was one of Johnny Rod's main men. You know, here's a funny story about him. So we all came up together in New York with Johnny Rodz and IWCCW, and then of course he went on to ECW. And I wish I would have stayed with those guys, because who knows how far I would have gotten if I'd have stayed with ECW. Right. You know, I probably could have been, you know, I probably would have been in WWE and all that stuff. But the one thing about him that I'll never forget is, and you would think with as many roads traveled and miles traveled that he would forget a lot of these things, but I hadn't seen him in several years, and he was still with ECW. This was before you know, WWE got involved. They had a show at the Lakefront Arena in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I remember I told one of my students, because I was training guys even back then. This was around, I want to say this was around 97, 98. Let's see. 97, 98, might have even been, hold on, man, I want to make sure I don't forget any of this stuff. But anyway, it was around 97, 98, 99, 2000, something like that. Because it was still ECW, but they were on their last leg.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I told one of my students, Brian Hart, who passed away, man, he self-inflicted gunshot wound. I said, come on, let's go to the ECW show. He goes, yeah, all right, man, let's go. There was somebody else with us, but I can't. I want to say it was Gil Gracie, a guy named Gil the Thrill Gracie. He uses the Gracie gimmick. Matter of fact, they did a documentary on him, a movie that came out on Netflix and Hulu, and it's called Fightville. I'm in that movie, working against Gil Gracie. Anyway, so we go to this show. We knock on the back door. A security guy comes out, and I don't know why I said it, but I just said it. You know, security guy says, "What do you need?" He goes, "I'm here to see Tommy Dreamer. He knows me. Tell him it's Dancing Wolf." So he goes back, closes the door. He goes back there, and there was a door, and then a rolling door, like a garage door, because we were in that ramp that goes, where the trucks go down to unload.
Right.
All of a sudden, that sliding door goes up. Not even the door, the sliding one, like that. And Tommy's there, and he goes, "Ow!" Swear to God, I hadn't seen him. This was in 97, 98, 99. I hadn't seen him since 92. He goes, "How you been, brother?" He invites me to come in and blah, blah, blah. I kid you not. He said, if you ever want work here, let me know. I don't know why I didn't jump on that, but I didn't. My students were all starstruck. They're like, holy shit, they really do know you. So fast forward, we have a show in 2007, 8. We have a show at the Heritage Hall in Ardmore, Oklahoma, and they booked Tommy for the show. Tommy shows up on the show. He sees my match because he was dressing in another area, and I don't know why we didn't run into each other the whole time we were there. We didn't run into each other, but after my match, he makes it a point to come to me, find me when I come through the curtain. He goes, I can't believe you still do that fucking senton. He remembered that my move was the senton, In other words, that's just the type of guy Tommy is. Tommy is, when you talk about down to earth, and I don't know anybody else. I don't know their stories. I don't care to know. I'm telling you my experience. With me, Tommy's always made it a point. He's never high-tone me or superstar me. He's always been down to earth, and we always talk about the old times. But I just love Tommy to death.
He does have a good memory when it comes to his career and such, or wrestling in general. I hear him on Busted Open Radio or his podcast that he had, and he tells some incredible stories, and some of the detail that he does remember when going into these stories is just incredible, especially in the time period that I love up until, the early to mid 90s and stuff. It's incredible.
Yeah, he does. Not only does he have a good memory, but he's got a mind for this business. And it's not one of those kind of things. You know how some people will say, "Oh, he's got a mind for this business. He's real old school," or he's got a mind for this business. He knows all the contemporary stuff. Tommy knows them both.
Right.
I mean, he literally can put together an old school match, and he could also put together a contemporary match. He mixes them very, very well. I've always admired that man's mind for the business.
He was in the period where things were changing. He was coming from the old school, and then that new school was starting. You know what I mean?
And that's the thing that I'm lucky. Just like Tommy, I'm lucky because I tell people, it's funny you should bring that up. I tell my students that all the time. I tell them, I was one of the very last lucky ones that was able to say that I came from the territory era, but we were started in this business. Me, Tommy, Chaz, we started towards the tail end of the territory era. We're
right.
lucky enough to be able to say that, a lot of people can't say that. The territory era died soon after we broke into business. And I remember when I first started training guys with my cousin at Gleason's Arena. Well, no, it started at St. Mary's when we first started training guys. Our two first trainees were two guys that were twins, as a matter of fact. It was Victor and Manny. They go by the Headhunters.
Okay.
And they were my first two trainees that I've ever trained. They give Johnny Rodz credit, and that's fine. But here recently, I actually caught him on video, and I put him on the spot. I said, Manny, I spoke to one of them. I said, why do you always say that Johnny trains you? You never mention me. And is it because I never made it as big as you guys? And I remember him saying, "No, brother, I love you, Papi. Yeah, this guy was my first trainer." So I got him on camera saying it. But anyway, I remember telling those guys, my very first 2 trainees, you better enjoy this because it's not going to be around very long.
Right.
And they're like, what? I said, this whole, the wrestling as you know it. And a few years later, territories died. Vince bought everything, and it turned into what it is today.
For at that time period in the later 80s, it was, I don't want to say it was gone, but it was pretty much gone. You know, Vern was on his last legs. Like, he shut down in 90, and, you know, Portland was probably one of the last territories to be able to shut down. Savoldis last till till 95, excuse me. Memphis was probably the only one that was kicking it until, you know, throughout the entire 90s, it seems.
Yeah, that's true. And there have been a few organizations that have tried to bring it back, but man, it's never going to come back. And I tell people that, and that's fine. Things evolve. I remember when the late Eddie Farhat Jr., who wrestled as Captain, oh God, can't think of his name, but anyway, Ed Farhat had a son named Ed Jr. who used to work as well, Captain something or another. But he tried to bring back big time wrestling, and well, we're going to start this territory back up. And I feel bad because a lot of my peers, and he was kind of one of my peers, a little bit older than me, but you know, they were just hanging on to the past, you know, and it's just, and I remember telling him, I said, Ed, it's not going to work, man. You know, the territory days died. Oh, now that I brought him up. So, him being one of my favorite, his dad being one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. I don't know why, but I was just so enthralled, so amazed by the Sheik throwing balls of fire in people's faces and using spikes, him and Abdullah and all these guys. And how ironic that Ed, when he tried to start back up a territory and he wanted me to be part of it. Of course, he had heat with his own cousin. That's his real cousin. Sabu is his real cousin. And they had heat. So he brought me in and said, man, I'm going to bring you in as Al Farhat. That's where Al Farat comes from. Al Farhat, you know, I'm going to tell people you're my cousin. And sure enough, till the day he died, he would tell everybody that we were cousins, and which is a huge honor. Don't get me wrong. But then I felt bad trying to capitalize off it. So I dropped the H and I became Farat instead of Farhat. But anyway,
Captain Ed George.
Yeah, Captain Ed George. That was his name. Captain Ed George. That was Eddie Farhat Jr. But him and his brother Jeff Farhat, yeah, they tried to keep it going, and they wanted to bring me in like the new incarnation of their dad, and which I thought was pretty freaking cool, considering that I grew up idolizing their dad, and he knew it, you know.
Yeah,
I think that's the reason why he did it. But, and you know, I got to see the original Sheik in Puerto Rico, as a matter of fact, and I'll never forget. You know, I said one day I want to do that gimmick, because I did the Native American gimmick for many years. And it wasn't till Skandar Akbar. I went to his school one year in 99, 2000, and I had my goatee. I had grown my goatee, and he said, you know, Al, and I've known him for years, but he knew me as Native American, you know, working the Native American gimmick with the Savoldis. You know, Al, you ever thought about doing an Arab gimmick, you know, with the Persian war and stuff going on? I'm like, well, I think it'd be kind of risky to do it now. No, bullshit. I think it'd go over good. And so he's the first one that encouraged me to do the gimmick, and told me where to go buy the boots. I bought the boots from the same maker that makes them for the Iron Sheik, that made boots for Ric Flair, for Booker T. Oh man, what is his name? Clifford Macias in Houston, Texas. I drove all the way down there just to get boots made. So I went all out. I bought the turban. I studied the language. Then when I met Eddie Jr., Eddie's the one that gave me the name Al Farhat. So I've been doing the Arab gimmick ever since.
Before I move along with further questions, now that we're talking the Sheik, I want to ask you: have you picked up the copy of the book on the Sheik by Brian Solomon? It came out, I think, within the last year.
No, I haven't, and I didn't even know about it till now. Now that you mentioned it, I'm probably going to search high and low for it.
I will send you a link to it, and send you
Please.
the yeah, and then so that you know what it is. I'm sure it's available on Amazon or whatever. It's called Blood and Fire. Brian Solomon worked for WWE, I think WWE Magazine back in the day. I think he does a podcast now called Shut Up and Wrestle. That's a very interesting podcast.
Really?
And he does the podcast for Pro Wrestling Illustrated currently as well. So
Well, I'll
yeah,
be damned. Yeah, please do.
yeah,
I probably can buy it as an ebook, so
yes,
I'll definitely take a look at it. I appreciate that information.
yeah. One other question about the guys out of that area, and then we're gonna move along. So,
Absolutely.
tell me about Gino Caruso.
Oh, what a nice guy, Gino.
Yeah,
I worked against Gino so many times. Me and my partner did a series of matches. Matter of fact, Gino started running shows as well years ago, and still does, I think.
yeah, ECPW.
ECPW. Yeah,
Yep.
that's it. Gino, we started having a series of matches. Me and White Wolf or White Cloud. It would be versus Gino Caruso and a guy named the Kodiak Bear.
I remember him.
Remember him?
Yep.
And I worked a lot of singles matches against Gino. Gino was another one of those guys where, man, just the salt of the earth. You would talk to him. He wasn't very loud spoken, and he's Italian, but
Yeah.
he wasn't very braggadocious. It's just a down to earth guy, man. Just a
Yep.
really, you know how you meet guys that most of these guys in the business, they're full of shit, and on top of that, they're just not pleasant to be around. Most of the guys, if not every single one you've mentioned so far, have been very, very pleasant to be around. Some were a little standoffish, like Phil, Damien Demento, Mondo Clean. He was a little, of course, Bubba Ray Dudley. He was sometimes a little bit hard to be around because he can be very boisterous and very
I've
loud.
heard. Yeah, I've
Very,
heard. Yeah, I've
yeah,
heard that sometimes he could not necessarily be so friendly in front of you know, uh, with fans, but I've also heard sometimes the complete opposite. So,
yeah. I don't know. I don't know if he's bipolar or what. But here's the interesting story. Before he broke into the business, before he shot up to stardom, he used to wrestle as Mondo Vile,
yep, I
or
remember.
it was Mongo with a G, something like that. Mongo Vile. One of his very first, one of the very first people that trained with him in the ring was me when we were working for Johnny Rodz. I remember having a series of matches just in the gym, practice matches, and I always thought he was amazing, really, really good guy. But he's now with me. He's always been very pleasant. But he tried to kind of superstar me one time at a show not too long ago. We had a show in front of like 3,000 people at the Fire Lake Arena in Oklahoma City. And I was trying to bring up a bunch of stuff that I knew he must have remembered, and he was like, "Oh, okay," that kind of a deal. But I don't know, maybe he really genuinely didn't remember. But there was guys, I remember there was guys like him, guys like Big Vito. Remember Big Vito?
Yes.
Who wore the dress? Well, he was Skull Von Crust back then.
Yep.
But again, and I rode with him to different shows, and he rode with me in my car to very many shows. Skull Von Crusted. These type of guys, and I don't think it to me, it wasn't that they were dicks or that they were difficult or obnoxious. I'll be honest, I think it's a cultural thing. Most Italians, I know because I'm half Puerto Rican and we're the same way. Most of us are just very loud. We're just
Yes.
very loud, and we talk loud. We talk with our hands. We're from New York over here. This is how we talk. You know what I mean? So I remember that they rubbed Big Vito and Bubba Ray. They rubbed people the wrong way, because but if you knew them or you were from where they were from, like you and I, you knew that's just the way they were.
Right.
I grew up like that in school. I grew up that's how we were. We were loud.
All right, so I want to talk to you about let's see, September 14th, 1993. You took on someone that I consider a legend in the world of professional wrestling, and from, Playboy, Buddy Rose.
Wow, holy smokes. Jeez, you're going way back. Buddy Rose, let me tell you something about Buddy. He wasn't the best looking in the ring,
Right.
obviously. But the thing about Buddy Rose that always struck me as incredibly smart, was that he took his let's see, how could I say this? He knew how to talk to promoters so that they would book him on his strengths, which was the fact that he was overweight, you know? So they would purposely say he was weighing in at 270, what? That's 217 pounds. Remember that?
Yes.
I mean, but the thing about it is, it was such a pleasure to work him because you had so much fun working him. Most of the times you were trying to prevent from laughing when you were in the ring with him. There were several people that they had that ability to just, you had fun with them inside the ring. Now, there were some people that didn't like Buddy Rose, you know, especially there towards the end, you know. I don't know about the substance abuse and the drinking because I was never around it. I don't know if that was true or not, but I think what his ultimate demise was his weight.
I think he seemed to get heavier as time went on.
Yeah, kind of like Adrian Adonis. He had a lot. He reminded me a lot of Adrian Adonis. Adrian Adonis was a hell of a worker. The problem was his weight got out of hand. Now, the difference between Adrian Adonis and Buddy Rose in the ring was that Adrian took liberties with guys. Adrian was, you know, kind of a prick in the ring. You know, he was if he wanted to, or if he was in a bad mood, he took it out on you. Buddy never did that.
I always thought that Buddy was kind of smooth in the ring. Like I've seen him in great matches, you know, whether he was a preliminary guy in WWF or working the AWA or Portland or wherever, you know, I always thought he was very good in the ring.
Well, he actually, in AWA, he had a tag team partner named Doug Summers.
Yep.
And I thought, I'll be honest with you, man, I thought they were an amazing tag team. And I honestly, I don't know why they weren't booked as a tag more like in WWF at the time, you know, and pushed.
Yeah, I mean, they were the tag team champions. They had an incredible match with, you know, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty for the tag titles. So I just,
but they both came into WWF as jobbers.
Yep. Yeah. Just a month later, you took on Lanny Poffo in Tampa, Florida. What are your memories of this?
Lanny Poffo. I actually worked Lanny Poffo twice.
Okay.
I don't think he was doing the
prior is probably the Genius gimmick, maybe.
Yeah, I don't remember if he was the Genius or not. He might have been. I don't know. But Lanny, what I can tell you about Lanny is Lanny was a really good worker, technical worker. Mm-hmm. He could work circles around a lot of people. The problem was that in my opinion, I think the reason why he never got a push was because the office wasn't a big. Let me. I want to be real careful when I say this because I don't want to sound. Because in this day and age, it doesn't matter whether you're gay, straight, black, white, atheist, a Trumpster, non-Trumpster. It doesn't matter. You know, you treat everybody the same. But right. in my opinion, they treated him kind of shitty and purposely didn't really push him too much because I thought personally the office thought that maybe he was a little too effeminate, you know.
Right. I see what you're saying there.
You know what I mean? It like they didn't respect him, and to me he wasn't. To me he was just just a classy dude. You know, if that's the case, what about Mil Mascaras? Mil Mascaras was when he pranced around the ring, he had he was a little light in the moccasins, but nobody ever said anything about him. And to me, that should have never been an issue. You know, wrestlers back in those days, and I'm not saying that Mil Mascaras and Lanny Poffo are gay, not at all, because I don't know that. But there were wrestlers that back in the day, like Pat Patterson, that they had to hide it. But those were the times. You know, I can tell you this: if Lanny Poffo was around now, and he was still in his youth now, he'd be over. He'd be one of the top guys for sure.
I always thought that he was a tremendous worker. You didn't get to experience that unless you were like at a house show necessarily, because on television he was always squashed, it seemed, and he'd probably get 2-3 moves in and then bam, that was it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, same thing. Thing. He's always squashed. He wasn't used very well.
Right. So I always thought that, and but they did, and at that time period in some of the job guys did have gimmicks. Like they made merchandise for him, the frisbees, or they had he wrote a poetry book. Then I just thought it was interesting.
Well, he's kind of in a weird spot because I wouldn't necessarily consider him a jobber,
Right.
as much as he was maybe a mid-carder.
Mm-hmm.
Jobbers to me were Frank Williams. That's a jobber. I hate to say it, but even Johnny Rodz. To me, Johnny Rodz was not a jobber anywhere else, but in WWF, he was a jobber,
Mm-hmm.
and he shouldn't have been. Jose Estrada, one of the greatest workers I've ever known.
Amazing. Yeah, he was
Jose is
great.
absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
He was never given the respect that he was deserved. They use these guys as enhancement. What's the guy that used to pat himself on the Barry Horowitz?
Barry Horowitz. I interviewed him 2 years ago. He's one of probably my first guest. If
Really?
Yeah, and I got to say that he called me on the phone probably a month before just to get a feel for me, and then we ended up having this. As soon as I mentioned the New Haven Coliseum in New Haven, Connecticut, all bets are off. Like this guy just went on talking and talking and talking, and and sharing some great memories about the New Haven Coliseum and going and wrestling there. So it was pretty awesome. They ended up doing an interview right after Christmas, that 2 years ago probably. I had a great time. Like the conversation was just awesome with that guy.
Oh, I'd like to check that out. But
Yeah.
to me, those guys that I just mentioned, I guess would be considered jobbers,
Yeah.
whereas Lanny Poffo was probably at an upper tier, a little bit above those guys, but still not where he deserved to be.
Yeah.
Far from where he needed to be,
You took part, was it in 01 in Japan, in Tokyo, Japan?
No, I never did work for 01.
No.
That might have been my tag team partner. I did go for a company. I can't remember the name of the company right now. And then a few months later, I was offered to go for Wings. I don't know if you remember Wings.
I remember Wing. Yep.
The first guys that I ever trained, they were huge for Wing, because one of the promoters was a guy named Victor Quinones, who absolutely, he was instrumental in the very beginning of my career. But the reason why I didn't go to Japan at the time is the same reason why I didn't go to WWF, the same reason why I didn't go to ECW, is because at the time I started dabbling into music. I don't know if you know this, but I've got 11 albums on the market.
Yes.
And my last 3 albums were nominated for the Grammy Awards, and music is my bread and butter. It's this 4-bedroom house, 2-car garage, 2 bathrooms, 4 acres of land is all because of my music, and I've been in movies. I just got done. I don't know if I'm even allowed to say this because it's not going to come out till 2023, but I guess I could. We just got done wrapping up a movie for Disney, the new Marvel movie Echo. I'm in it. Me and my band are playing in a huge scene, and they used my band T-shirts because I got T-shirts for my band. And they sent me a letter. Deidre Black sends me a letter, says, "Hey, can we use your band T-shirts on some of the extras and some of the actors? They're going to wear it on screen." I was like, holy shit. Plus, we did that in Atlanta, Georgia. And then we just filmed a movie called Fancy Dancer for Erica Tremblay. She's the producer of a very hot show called Reservation Dogs that's on Hulu. So, that's always been my first love. I'm not ashamed to say it. And what I think what happened was I've always been a musician since I was young. I come from a family of musicians. So when I got that letter back from James Dillon and then Tatanka, I focused all my energy on music. Thankfully, I did, because again, 11 albums later, I'm doing all this stuff. But when I decided to get back into wrestling, because I figured I still had enough gas in the tank, that's kind of when I started doing the Farat thing around 99, 2000. I got to wrestle some of my best matches were when I started as Farat. Hell, I'm in 3 halls of fame now. The There's the actual National Hall of Fame that used to be in Wichita Falls. Now it's moving to Oklahoma, to McAlester, Oklahoma. I don't know what happened, but something about misappropriation of funds. But they inducted me there. They have my boots in there. Who'd have ever thought I'd have my stuff in the museum?
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. And then the NWA Amarillo Hall of Fame, I'm in that one. I'm in another one out in the East Coast. It's crazy how things happen. And people, when they run into me again, wrestlers, they're like, "Oh shit, you've been doing all that, movies," and no wonder we haven't seen. That's the reason why I kind of put wrestling on the back burner, but now it seems to be a thing that guys my age making comebacks like PCO and the Rock
He's
and Roll
been killing
Express.
it.
He's been killing it, dude.
He has. Yeah.
All these guys that are our age and older now seem to be fucking over now, which it seems to be like a thing now. And so I'm taking full advantage of it. I'm taking bookings all over the place and trying to get my foot back in the door. And who knows where it'll take me.
If you ever end up back in Connecticut, you got to let me know. Like seriously, because or around the area. If you don't mind, if we got a little time, I've got a little bit of time left. So
I've got all the time in the world.
Yeah, I'll just ask you a couple more questions about some guys that you met, that some legends that I've read about. How about Hacksaw Jim Duggan?
Oh man, let me tell you, I've wrestled Hacksaw Jim Duggan so many times that if someone were to ask me, could you wrestle one more time, I'd say absolutely not. I'm so tired of working him, but he's one of my dearest friends. I kid you not, I lost count. The first show I ever did with him was in Lawton, Oklahoma, in front of 3,500 people, and 2,000 of them were soldiers. It was right on the Fort Sill Army base. He comes up to me and he goes, "Al, I know you don't know me, but let's knock it out of the park, brother." I said, "Okay. You're going to come out and interrupt the national anthem." On Fort Sill Army base, you want me to interrupt the national anthem? I had just started doing the Al Farat. This was like 2000 or 2001. Anyway, here it is. I kid you not. I'm not. I know you're probably going to think I'm exaggerating, but I swear I've wrestled them way over 20 times. Maybe not 30, but close to it. I guarantee you. And it's always the same match every single. I can do the match with my eyes closed.
He's a hell of a guy. I met him a couple different times, and we've spoken on social media a few times as well. Just genuinely very, very nice guy.
Well, I'll tell you this about him. He's always been real good to me. He's actually got me work. He's actually called and said, "Hey, I told the promoter I wanted them to fly you in because I'm really easy to work with." And we do the same match over and over. But I will tell you this about Hacksaw. One thing that pissed me off about him is I was working for a company in Arkansas called Traditional Championship Wrestling. Matt Riviera was the owner. And he said, and Matt loved me. I was like his number one heel. He had Ken Resnick, the former announcer for WWF,
yep,
who's a dear friend of mine. We talk every week. He had Ken Resnick. Nelson Swegler was on the. He used to write for WWF. They all had me in a super angle, and they wanted me to, for the first time ever. I had already wrestled Hacksaw about 20 times. They said, "Hacksaw, Al's going to take the 2x4 from you and hit you with it. We're going to turn it into an angle." Hacksaw said no. For the first time, if we've wrestled 29 times, I've put him over 29 times. They wanted him to put me over one time, and he didn't do it. That's one negative I have about Hacksaw. And I actually told him in the locker room because he wound up having to do it because they told him either do it or we're sending you home without pay. And so he did it begrudgingly. He did it. But I remember going to the back and telling him, "Man, that's kind of bullshit, Hacksaw. The one time they want to. Well, nobody's ever touched my 2x4. I said, "Hacksaw, it's a fucking gimmick. It's a work. It's a show. It's fake. It's fake, dude." "Oh, well, Al, I guess you're right. I'm sorry about that." But boy, that really didn't sit well with me. But anyway,
he must have been in a bad mood.
He must have been. That's what I say. He must have been in it because he's a nice guy. He's the nicest guy in the world. But then again, remember, he had cancer, and around that time, he had just gone into remission, and he had the effects of the medicine. I guess I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah. Tell me about the Honky Tonk Man.
I worked him several times. Honky is one of those guys where he reminds me a lot of Jim Cornette in that they just like to run their mouths, Jim,
I'm a corny fan, so
No, me too. No, I love Jim Cornette. I love Jim. I get him, and let me tell you, he's pissed off a lot of people, but that's just Jim. You know, really in a fist fight, he probably couldn't beat up a 4-year-old, but that's just Jim. Jim's very loud like that, especially, you know, behind the keyboard and behind the camera. You know, if he's face to face, he'll probably lose his temper, but quickly get shot down. But Honky reminds me a lot of him in a sense that Honky likes to talk a lot of shit sometimes, and sometimes it's not substantiated. It's not, you know, he can't back it. But I've worked him several times. I'll tell you one thing: one of the easiest guys I've ever worked. Honky is super, super, super easy to work with in the ring.
What about the King, Jerry Lawler?
Oh man, Jerry. I've worked him probably about 5-6 times.
Yeah.
Tag, one-on-one, always great matches. The one thing about he doesn't care if he puts you over. He doesn't give a shit. But the one thing about Jerry that I will say is Jerry can sometimes be a little bit how could I say that, out of touch with reality. Sometimes he'll say things and I guess he still thinks he's the king from back in the day, I guess. I don't know. Like, for example, I did a show with him in Fort Smith. It was the first time I ever worked him, and I've worked him since then 6-8 times. And I remember that of course I weigh 238 now, but back then I was 320 pounds. I was at my heaviest. I remember I walked in there, and Matt Riviera, who was the promoter, I'm sorry, it was Bill Ash. Bill Ash was who passed away recently. Bill Ash said, "Okay, Jerry, you're going to work Al, the Sheik, blah, 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 blah." I walk in there. First thing out of Jerry's mouth, it doesn't even shake my fucking hand. The first thing out of his mouth is, he looks at me, looks at Bill, and goes, "I thought you said he wasn't fat." Just like that. Swear to God.
Wow.
So, but he's the kind of guy that if you give it right back to him, he backs off. If he knows he can walk all over you, he will. Jerry will. So I looked at him. I said, "The fuck does it matter whether I'm fat or not? I don't have to do much. You ever heard of Abby?" Of course, that's just the first thing that came out of my mouth. Then we started having the match. But after when we got back from our match, he actually said, "Man, you are absolutely amazing. Your timing is right. You fed into the camera. I bring him into the camera, you know, and I wherever the camera was at, the hard camera, the roaming camera, there I was." So we never became friends. Unlike me and Barbarian are really, really, really close. But that's just Jerry. I don't think Jerry has any friends.
I'm going to ask you about Tim Storm.
Tim Storm is another very dear friend of mine. When I first moved to the Oklahoma, Texas area, I did a lot of shows with Tim Storm. Mm-hmm. He still had the old look, the long mullet with the handlebar mustache.
I remember him was it Traditional Championship Wrestling? I think he wrestled for. Do you remember that group?
Yeah, that's the one I wrestled for, Traditional, TCW. That's Matt Riviera's group I was telling you about.
We used to get the TV up here, but it was on at like 4 or 5 in the morning. And when I had my first kid, I'd wake up and it was on. So, waking up to feed the baby in the middle of the night, I would watch it. So
I have been on tons of those TCW television shows. Well, he had already transitioned into his new gimmick at TCW. He already had the new look. I remember I was one of the first. I remember I was one of the first ones that told him. I said, "I like that look. It suits you better." A lot of people don't know this about Tim Storm, but he's like 56 years old. He's up there, but he looks good. And they put the NWA title on him at one time.
He held it for a while, and was it 2018 he lost it? 2017, around that time period, and. For a man his age, he's still on NWA TV, doing commentary, and he'll have the occasional match, but he still looks great at his age.
Well, the thing about Tim is not the best worker in the world. He's average.
Yeah.
The thing about Tim that separates him from everybody else is that when you meet Tim, you quickly realize that he's an absolutely super guy. I mean, he has a really, really good attitude, good dude. He knows how to play the politics. Don't get me wrong. He knows how to play the politics, but he's a nice guy. And And he's the kind of guy that he reminds me a lot of Tommy Dreamer. He's just pleasant to be around. You know, he doesn't have a bad thing to say about people. Even when you try to get him to talk bad about somebody, he'll do one of them deals. You know, that's just how he is. He's a really, really, really nice guy. And I remember telling him many times, because I've rode in cars with Tim dozens of times, and I remember telling him, Tim, you and I have that in common. We're not the best workers, but we know how to treat people right. We're just good people. You know, you treat people right, you know, they're going to want to do for you. And that's the type of person he is. People will book him just because, oh man, that's my buddy Tim, you know. Good guy, really good guy.
What about, let's see, Barret Brown?
Barret Brown, I wrestled him before he was Americos, and before he was who he is now. Barret Brown is a really, really good hand. Probably one of the most humble young men you'll ever meet. I mean, you talk about a guy that loves his parents, loves people in general. He's just a really, really kind guy. He's the type of guy that if I had $1 million and I wanted to buy a wrestling company, of course, that probably would be the dumbest thing I ever did. But let's just say I bought a wrestling company. He'd be one of the people I'd automatically have on my roster. Barret Brown is an absolute salt of the earth kind of a guy. I just absolutely love Barret Brown. I don't have anything bad to say about him. And I don't know anybody that does. Right. I guarantee you I could find people to talk bad about Tim Storm before you'll find anybody to talk bad about Barret. That's how good of a kid he is.
Wow. Tell me about Soul Train Jones.
Oh, man. I don't remember very much about Soul Train. I had a match with him, I believe, for TCW.
Mm-hmm.
We were in, I want to say, Little Rock. It wasn't a bad match. As a matter of fact, I remember thinking, because everybody told me, careful, you know, he's a good guy, but, you know, he's kind of clumsy, blah, blah, blah. I brought out the best in that guy. You know, I did the best that I can, and we had an incredibly good match, and it was for TCW. It's somewhere online.
I think a bunch of their TV is up there on YouTube somewhere.
Yeah. But I don't know very much about him.
I got two more, and then we'll wrap it up in a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah.
Jake Roberts.
Jake Roberts, I worked him 2 or 3 times. I worked him in front of 4,000 people at the Fire Lake. I remember one-on-one, and then we had a tag match a few months later. Jake, you know, you've heard the stories.
Of course.
I don't have to tell you.
They're well documented in movies and such.
Yep.
So, yeah.
The only thing I can tell you about Jake is I don't know him enough on a personal level. What I do know is he used to book for a company called Texoma Pro Wrestling in Sherman, Texas, and completely screwed over the company. But he was heavily on drugs and alcohol. I don't have anything negative to say because I never had any negative experiences with him. But I can tell you that he wasn't too happy with me the last time we had a match, because he really, really made me look good, like really, really good. And he put me over. I couldn't believe it. And he put me over, and I forget what we were doing. And the promoter wanted this. The promoter said, after your match, I want you to grab the mic and talk about you wanting to face another legend, and then call out Hacksaw. You mean you want me to work Hacksaw for the 31st time? Fine. So I grabbed it. I grabbed the mic, and I remember that when I started cutting my promo, Jake was halfway down the back to the locker room. He kind of turned around and went like this, like, what the fuck, you know? So I went to the back. I don't think he was made privy. So I get to the back. He starts getting in my face. Of course, and I'm not the type to back down. So I immediately let him know. I put my hand out on his chest. I said, back the fuck up. You can say what you're going to say, but back the fuck up, you know? He was like, man, had I fucking known you were going to use me to fucking put Hacksaw over, I wouldn't have fucking done it. You know, I would have told the promoter to put me over. I said, why are you yelling at me? I'm just doing my fucking job. I'm following the script. Yeah, he wasn't too happy. I haven't seen him since, but that's my Jake story.
All right, last one. And what about Chaz Taylor?
Chaz Taylor. Wow. Boy, that's kind of random.
I remember him well, watching him. Was he? He worked for Global, I
Yeah,
believe.
for
Watching
Global
him. Yeah.
and for USWA for a little bit, but
Yep.
Global.
Yep.
Chaz Taylor and me, we're friends. Uh, I don't know that he has a whole lot of people that can say that about him. I personally like Chaz. I like him.
Hmm.
He's always been good to me. Him and his dad, Tugboat, the original
Tugboat.
Tugboat.
Yep.
His
I
dad
remember
was
him.
the original Tugboat Taylor. Chaz has always been good to me, man. Chaz has always been my bro. Yeah, he can rub people the wrong way, but that's just Chaz. Chaz is just always, he's always looking. He's always looking for to put himself over, and you know what? That's wrestling. We all do it. We all put ourselves over, or try to anyway. But no, Chaz is a good guy. Chaz, I think that a lot of promoters that have wanted to use Chaz have probably used him, and for some reason never used him again. Maybe it's, you know, people would say, well, he comes off the wrong way, like he tries to, shove himself down your throat. Well, I mean, we all do that. All of us do that. I can tell you that, uh, he was there on time. He was a good hand. You know, uh, I don't have anything negative to say about Chaz.
That's good.
Good
All
guy.
right. So why don't you, before we wrap it up, we got into your music career a little bit. Why don't you reiterate about that and tell us what you're up to these days? You're part of a group.
Yeah. Well, I'm a singer for a group called Otter Trail. Otter like the animal, Otter, trail like in trail mix. Otter Trail. It's a Native American singing group. We have 11 albums on the market. The last 3 were nominated for the Grammy Awards and NAMA, NAMA. And as a single vocalist, I've also been featured on the major motion picture soundtrack for Mission Impossible, the first one with Tom Cruise. I've worked with Paul Winter Consort. I've been a musician and a singer for a very long time, and we travel all over. I don't. When I say we travel hard, you can follow my Facebook page and my personal one and my Otter Trail one and see that we're somewhere every single weekend. It doesn't slow down till December, and then it picks right back up the end of February when we go to Florida for a month and a half. We're going to Mohegan Sun next year. That's in Connecticut.
That's okay. Like I said, let me know. I live an hour away from there.
Oh yeah.
My wife loves to go to the casino. We go up there for concerts all the time. Give me the information, send it over. And
Well,
then,
I'll tell you what. I'm letting you know right now. They contracted us for October. I think it's the 18th and 19th for Mohegan Sun for the Mohegan Tribal Powwow and Native American Festival. I'll let you know early because I want to see you there. We're also going to the Pequot one. We travel all over. From when I say I've been around the world 8 times, I've been around the world 8 times. And here's a funny thing: I've been around the world 8 times doing music, not wrestling. As a wrestler, I've traveled a few countries, Guatemala. I've been here and there, but honestly, music is my first love, and you can catch it on www.facebook.com/Otter Trail, all one word, OTTERTRAIL. You can check us out there. We're also on Instagram, same thing. You can also check out Al Farat's doings on www.facebook.com/the Arab legend Al Farat. I've got some business ventures that I'm doing, just a bunch of stuff. I'll be in Nashville, Tennessee this weekend. I'll be in Floresville, Texas the following weekend. Then we head to Salt Lake City, Utah. And man, our calendar, you can find my music calendar on my Facebook page, the Otter Trail one, and my wrestling calendar on my wrestling page. But most of all, the thing that I'm most excited about is the movie. Man, brother, that movie, I'll be in a major motion picture movie in 2023 and Marvel Disney's Echo, ECHO. It's about the first ever female Native American superhero. So you got to check it out. I'm part of the Marvel universe. It's huge. I can't even begin to tell you. We have t-shirts, CDs. I have an Al Farat doll. I have Al Farat t-shirts. I've got a bunch of merchandise on both those sites. But most of all, it was absolutely an honor and a pleasure. And I'm tickled pink that we got to catch up with all of the old wrestling stuff.
I'm happy that you came on here. I want to thank you so much. We're gonna have to
Oh,
definitely do this again at some point
are you
down the
kidding,
road.
man? I'm available anytime, man. You just give me a holler, and don't forget, I want to see you in Connecticut, dude.
I like I said, my wife is a frequent casino goer, so we usually go up there for concerts. She likes to gamble, so we're definitely gonna head up there when you're up there.
Well, your wife and my wife are going to get along because while I'm out there busting my ass singing, guess where she's at?
There you go.
Pulling the slots.
All right, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Take care. God bless.